A millionaire thought he had found the perfect wife, an ideal woman for his luxurious and high-status life. But on their wedding night, the woman shouted, "Don't touch me," and revealed that she was a virgin. The revelation shocked the millionaire's expectations. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. The September sun cast a golden glow over the manicured lawns of Greenwich, Connecticut, as Evelyn Montgomery stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom. At 32, she embodied everything her mother, Victoria, had meticulously crafted, poised, elegant, and the perfect candidate for marriage into high society. "Stand up straighter, Evelyn," Victoria instructed, adjusting the delicate pearl necklace around her daughter's neck. "Remember what I always say." "Appearance is reality," Evelyn completed the sentence, a mantra that had been drilled into her since she was old enough to walk in the Mary Janes her mother had imported from Paris. Victoria smiled with satisfaction. "Exactly. And tonight you need to be flawless. The Blackwoods aren't just wealthy, they're Connecticut royalty." Her fingers traced the silhouette of Evelyn's designer dress. "And their son needs a wife who meets their standards." Evelyn nodded, her reflection revealing nothing of the anxiety churning beneath her perfect exterior. At 32, she was what Greenwich society whispered was approaching expiration. Still beautiful, still desirable, but racing against an invisible clock that Victoria could hear ticking louder with each passing season. "Richard Blackwood could be everything we've worked for," Victoria continued, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, despite there being no one else in the room. "Imagine what his name could do for us. For you." She squeezed Evelyn's shoulders with a pressure that somehow communicated both affection and warning. Evelyn's childhood home, once a symbol of upper-middle-class comfort, had become increasingly difficult to maintain after her father's business. Ventures had collapsed 10 years ago. The facade of prosperity Victoria clung to was beginning to crack, visible in the subtle signs that only those within their social circle would recognize. Last season's curtains, the repeatedly repaired, roof staff reduced to a single housekeeper who came twice weekly. "I know, Mother." Evelyn's voice was soft but controlled, revealing none of the resentment that occasionally surfaced when she allowed herself to acknowledge that at 32, her life's accomplishments were measured not in personal achievements, but in how successfully she could attract a wealthy husband. Victoria stepped back, assessing her daughter with the critical eye of a curator evaluating a priceless artifact. "You're beautiful, darling. You've always been beautiful. But beauty alone isn't enough. The Blackwoods have their pick of beautiful women. You need to be exceptional." Evelyn had heard variations of this speech throughout her life. As a child, it meant perfect grades and impeccable manners. As a teenager, it translated to carefully monitored social connections and extracurricular activities that would enhance her appeal. In college, it meant majoring in art history, cultured enough to be interesting at dinner parties, but not so ambitious as to threaten a future husband's ego. Now at 32, being exceptional meant being the ideal wife. Sophisticated without, being intimidating, intelligent without being challenging, and supportive without requiring support in return. "Do you remember everything we practiced?" Victoria asked, referring to the conversational topics they had rehearsed for tonight's charity gala. "About Richard's investments in sustainable energy?" "Yes, Mother. And his recent sailing expedition around the Greek islands, his collection of rare first editions, and his philanthropic work with inner-city schools." Evelyn recited the facts with practiced enthusiasm, facts gleaned from Victoria's relentless research into Richard Blackwood's life and interests. Victoria beamed. "Perfect. You'll enchant him, I know it." She checked her watch, a Cartier that had been a gift from Evelyn's father in better days. "Let's go. We don't want to be unfashionably late." The drive to the Westchester Country Club was filled with Victoria's final instructions, reminders about posture, appropriate laughter volume, and the strategic positioning required to accidentally encounter Richard Blackwood by the champagne table, where Victoria's friend Judith had confirmed he typically made an appearance early in the evening. Evelyn nodded at appropriate intervals, but her mind drifted to the strange emptiness that had been her constant companion for years now. Despite her perfectly curated life, something essential was missing. A void that grew larger with each passing year, with each new prospective husband who failed to materialize into the savior Victoria awaited. The country club glittered with wealth and privilege when they arrived. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits, the air perfumed with expensive fragrances and the subtle scent of power. Victoria immediately began navigating the social currents with the skill of a seasoned sailor, nodding to acquaintances, air-kissing friends, and strategically guiding Evelyn toward their target. "There he is," Victoria whispered, nodding subtly toward the champagne table. "Remember, let him notice you. Don't appear eager." Richard Blackwood stood exactly where Victoria had predicted, a glass of champagne in his hand, engaged in conversation with two older men who Evelyn recognized as prominent figures in Connecticut's financial world. At 40, Richard carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. Tall, with features that were handsome rather than pretty, he embodied old money with an ease that couldn't be learned or imitated. Victoria executed her plan flawlessly, maneuvering through the crowd until they were within Richard's line of sight, then engaging Evelyn in animated conversation designed to showcase her daughter's best qualities. Evelyn played her part perfectly, laughing at the right moments, her posture elegant, her expression intelligent but approachable. She felt his eyes on her before Victoria did, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that she had been trained to recognize. Without looking directly at him, she knew Richard Blackwood was watching her, assessing her with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to acquiring valuable things. "He's looking," Victoria murmured, triumph evident in her tone. "Now, we wait." The waiting lasted precisely 12 minutes. Victoria counted each one with internal precision before Richard approached, 2 fresh glasses of champagne in hand. "Victoria Montgomery," he greeted, his voice carrying the polished tones of prep school elocution. "Wonderful to see you again. And this must be your daughter, Evelyn." Victoria beamed with practiced modesty. "Richard, how kind of you to remember. Yes, this is my Evelyn. Darling, this is Richard Blackwood." Evelyn extended her hand with the precise amount of pressure her mother had taught her, firm enough to indicate confidence, soft enough to remind him of her femininity. "Mr. Blackwood, I've heard so much about your work in sustainable energy. It's refreshing to see someone in your position taking such a progressive stance." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, pleasantly surprised by her knowledge. "Most people, at these events, prefer to discuss my sailing adventures rather than my business ventures." "Well," Evelyn responded with a smile that revealed just the right amount of perfect teeth, "I find wind patterns fascinating whether they're powering turbines or propelling yachts through the Mediterranean." Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes glowed with approval. "Perfect," they seemed to say, "absolutely perfect." As Richard laughed, genuinely, not the polite chuckle reserved for social obligations, Evelyn felt a familiar sensation settle over her. She was performing well, hitting every note of the symphony Victoria had composed for her life. Yet beneath the perfect execution lurked that persistent emptiness, a hollowness that seemed to expand as Richard's interest in her became increasingly evident throughout the evening. When he asked her to dance, his hand at the small of her back, both possessive and respectful, Victoria's face shone with a triumph that bordered on reverence. This was the moment she had orchestrated for decades. Evelyn in the arms of one of New England's most eligible bachelors, every eye in the room on them, every whispered comment acknowledging that Evelyn Montgomery might have finally secured the future Victoria had designed for her. "Oh, you're different from the women I usually meet," Richard said as they moved across the dance floor, his lead confident but not controlling. "Different in a good way, I hope," Evelyn responded, the script flowing effortlessly from her lips. "In the best way." His eyes held hers with an intensity that suggested he was seeing beyond the carefully constructed facade to something genuine beneath. It was an illusion, of course. Evelyn knew there was nothing genuine to see. She had, been hollowed out and rebuilt too many times to contain anything authentic. Yet as the evening progressed, as Richard's attention remained fixed solely on her, Evelyn found herself wondering if perhaps this time would be different. If perhaps Richard Blackwood, with his billions and his influence, might fill the void that grew within her with each passing year. By the time he asked for her number, bypassing Victoria's carefully orchestrated scenario, where Evelyn would be available but not readily accessible, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Richard's interest in her was genuine. That perhaps he saw something in her that even she could no longer identify. The drive home was a victory parade with Victoria as the triumphant general. Did you see how he couldn't take his eyes off you? How he dismissed Marianne Phillips when she tried to cut in? This is it, Evelyn. This is everything we've worked for. Evelyn nodded, watching the familiar Connecticut landscape pass by outside the car window. He seems different from the others. He is different, Victoria agreed fervently. He's Richard Blackwood, not some minor investment banker or second-tier surgeon. He's exactly what we've been waiting for. What we've been waiting for. Not who, but what. A means to an end. A solution to the problem of Evelyn's increasingly desperate spinsterhood and Victoria's quietly declining finances. He sent flowers again. Evelyn's voice echoed through the phone line as she stood in her modest apartment in downtown Greenwich, staring at the fifth bouquet of the week, each more lavish than the last. Victoria's delighted gasp was audible even without speakerphone. What kind this time? Orchids, rare ones. Evelyn touched the delicate white petals. The card says they were flown in from Thailand this morning. Perfect, Victoria breathed, the word carrying the weight of decades of anticipation. This. Hair's moving so quickly, Evelyn, faster than I dared hope. It had been just 3 weeks since the charity gala, and Richard Blackwood had pursued Evelyn with an intensity that surprised even Victoria. Dinner at exclusive restaurants where reservations typically required months of advance notice. A spontaneous day trip to Martha's Vineyard on his private helicopter. Front row seats at a sold-out Broadway show, followed by a private meeting with the lead actors. Each date was masterfully orchestrated to impress, each gesture calculated to overwhelm. And Evelyn, trained her entire life to recognize and appreciate such displays of wealth and status, responded exactly as Victoria had prepared her to, with gracious appreciation that never crossed into unseemly enthusiasm, with intelligent conversation that never challenged Richard's worldview, with feminine warmth that promised deeper affection without explicitly offering it. "He wants to take me to his lake house in the Adirondacks this weekend," Evelyn said, moving away from the orchids to peer out her apartment window at the street below. Her apartment, small but elegant, had been Victoria's compromise when Evelyn had insisted on some independence after college. Close enough to be supervised, modest enough to remind Evelyn that this was a temporary situation, not a permanent life choice. Victoria's silence lasted 3 seconds. Evelyn counted them, recognizing the calculation happening in her mother's mind. A weekend away was significant, intimate. It carried expectations that Evelyn had thus far managed to defer. "This is a crucial step," Victoria finally said, her tone measured. "He's inviting you into his private world, his true sanctuary." "I know." Evelyn's reflection in the window looked back at her, perfect makeup concealing the shadows beneath her eyes, designer clothes hiding the weight she'd lost in the past weeks, from the stress of performing flawlessness around the clock. "You'll need to be perfect," Victoria continued. "Shall I come help you pack? We need to consider every outfit, every scenario." "That won't be necessary." Evelyn's voice took on an unusual firmness. "I can manage." Another pause, this one laden with surprise. "Well, of course you can, darling. But this weekend could change everything. We can't leave anything to chance." "I'll stop by tomorrow before I leave," Evelyn conceded, knowing that Victoria would not be satisfied until she had inspected and approved every item Evelyn planned to bring. "I should go now. I have a deadline." Evelyn's job as a freelance art consultant for a small gallery was another of Victoria's strategic placements, cultured enough to be respectable, flexible enough to be abandoned when the right husband came along. The gallery owner, an old friend of Victoria's, understood the arrangement perfectly. After ending the call with her mother, Evelyn sank onto her sofa, the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Richard Blackwood was everything Victoria had ever wanted for her, wealthy beyond imagination, powerful beyond measure, and inexplicably enchanted by Evelyn. Her phone chimed with a text from Richard, "Missing you already. Counting the hours until Friday." Evelyn stared at the message, trying to reconcile the warmth it sparked within her with the hollow performance she knew her relationship to be. Because despite Victoria's meticulous programming, something unexpected had happened. Evelyn had begun to feel something genuine for Richard. It wasn't love. She wasn't naive enough to mistake infatuation for love. But it was something. Something. Real in a life built entirely on carefully constructed illusions. Richard, for all his calculated gestures and obvious pursuit, seemed to see her in a way no one else ever had. Not as Victoria Montgomery's perfect daughter, not as an ornament for his lifestyle, but as Evelyn, whoever that might be. The realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating, for if Richard saw the real Evelyn, what would happen when he discovered the truth that she had hidden from everyone, including Victoria? The secret that made her less than perfect, less than the ideal wife he clearly sought. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth for early October. Richard's driver collected Evelyn from her apartment. Her weekend bag, contents approved by Victoria the previous day, stowed carefully in the trunk of the Bentley. The drive to the Adirondacks took just under 4 hours, time that Evelyn spent alternating between polite conversation with Richard and gazing out at the landscape as it transformed from suburban affluence to rural splendor. The fall foliage was at its peak, a riot of crimson and gold that even Victoria would have admitted was more impressive than any designer showroom. "Almost there," Richard said as they turned onto a private road, unmarked except for a discreet security camera mounted on an ancient oak. "I've been coming here since I was a child. It's the one place where I can truly be myself." Evelyn smiled, the practiced expression coming automatically. "It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with me." Richard reached across the seat to take her hand, his touch warm and confident. "I've never brought anyone here before, not like this." The significance of his statement wasn't lost on Evelyn. In the carefully choreographed dance of their courtship, this was a major step, an invitation into his inner sanctum, a privilege, apparently not extended to the parade of socialites and models who had preceded her in Richard's life. The lake house turned out to be a magnificent lodge, perched on a cliff overlooking a pristine lake. Its architecture a perfect blend of rustic tradition and modern luxury. Staff materialized as they arrived, efficiently whisking away luggage and offering refreshments with the practiced invisibility of those trained to anticipate needs without intruding on privacy. "I'll show you around," Richard said, taking Evelyn's hand again, his eyes warm with an emotion that made her pulse quicken despite her determination to remain detached. The tour revealed a home that, unlike many displays of wealth Evelyn had encountered, actually felt lived in. Family photographs lined hallways, books filled shelves without the obvious staging of an interior decorator, and furniture showed signs of use rather than being preserved as showpieces. "This is my favorite spot," Richard said, as they stepped onto a wide deck overlooking the lake. The sun was beginning to set, painting the water with streaks of gold and crimson that mirrored the surrounding trees. "When I was a kid, I used to sit out here for hours, just watching the water and dreaming about what my life would be like." "And has it turned out the way you imagined?" Evelyn asked, genuinely curious despite herself. Richard leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful. "In some ways. The business success, the material things, those came easier than I expected. But other things," he turned to look at her directly, "the important things have been more elusive." "Such as?" Evelyn prompted, sensing they were veering into territory beyond the script Victoria had prepared her for. "Connection. Understanding." His voice softened. "Finding someone who sees me as more than a Blackwood, more than a bank account." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on Evelyn, whose entire relationship with him had been orchestrated precisely because he was a Blackwood with a substantial bank account. Guilt flashed through her, sharp and unexpected. "I think people probably see what you show them," she said carefully, skirting the edge of honesty without falling fully into it. Richard's smile was warm, approving. "That's exactly it. And most people are satisfied with the surface. They don't look deeper." "And you think I do?" Evelyn asked, suddenly wary of the direction their conversation was taking. "I know you do." His confidence was absolute. "From the first moment we spoke, you've seen beyond the Blackwood name. You've seen me." His words filled Evelyn with a panic that threatened to crack her perfect composure. He had it exactly backward. She hadn't seen the real Richard at all. She had seen the projection of wealth and status that Victoria had trained her to identify and pursue. If anyone was failing to see beyond surfaces, it was Evelyn. "Richard, she began, unsure what truth she might actually be prepared to offer. "You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know this is happening quickly, but sometimes, when it's right, you just know." He took both her hands in his. "I've dated a lot of women, Evelyn, beautiful women, accomplished women, but none of them have made me feel the way you do, like I can truly be myself." The genuine emotion in. His voice left Evelyn speechless. This wasn't in Victoria's script. Richard wasn't supposed to be vulnerable or authentic. He was supposed to be captivated by the perfect illusion of Evelyn Montgomery, not imagining some deeper connection that didn't exist. "Let's have dinner," Richard suggested, misinterpreting her silence as emotion rather than panic. "The chef has prepared something special." Dinner was served in a glass-enclosed dining room that offered panoramic views of the moonlit lake. The meal was exquisite, the wine perfectly paired, and the conversation flowed easily as Richard shared stories of his childhood summers at the lake house. Evelyn responded with carefully edited anecdotes from her own past, versions of her life that emphasized the charming and concealed the desperate. As the evening progressed, as the wine softened the edges of her perpetual performance, Evelyn found herself wondering what it would be like to tell Richard the truth, not just about her physical status, but about everything. Victoria's machinations, the years of training to become someone's perfect wife, the emptiness that had become the core of her identity. But such honesty was unthinkable. Victoria would be horrified. The carefully constructed future would collapse. And Richard, despite his apparent appreciation for authenticity, would surely recoil from the revelation that his perfect Evelyn was a fabrication designed specifically to capture him. After dinner, they returned to the deck, now illuminated by discreet lighting that emphasized the beauty of the lake without diminishing the brilliance of the stars above. Richard stood behind Evelyn, his arms encircling her waist as they gazed out at the water. "I have something for you," he said, his breath warm against her ear. Evelyn tensed slightly, wondering what new extravagance he had planned. Another piece of jewelry to join the diamond bracelet he'd given her last week. Tickets to some exclusive event, a key to one of his many homes. Instead, Richard released her and stepped back, retrieving a small wooden box from his pocket. Not a jeweler's velvet case, but something older, more personal. He opened it to reveal a simple silver ring with a single pearl. "This was my grandmother's," he explained, his voice unexpectedly hesitant. "My grandfather gave it to her when they first fell in love, long before he could afford diamonds. She wore it until the day she passed, even after he gave her much more elaborate pieces." Evelyn stared at the ring, its simplicity a stark contrast to the opulence that had defined their relationship thus far. "It's beautiful," she said truthfully. "Evelyn," Richard began, and she realized with a shock that his voice held a note of nervousness she had never heard before. "I know this seems fast, maybe even crazy, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Time seemed to slow as he took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not offering this as an engagement ring. Not yet. That would be too soon even for me." He smiled self-deprecatingly. "But I want you to have it as a promise, a promise that what we're building together is real and lasting. Evelyn felt something shift inside her, a tectonic movement in the carefully constructed landscape of her being. This man, this wealthy, powerful man whom Victoria had selected as the perfect solution to every problem, was looking at her with genuine emotion, offering her something that couldn't be valued in dollars or social status. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, the words escaping before she could craft a more appropriate response. "Say you'll accept it," Richard urged, his confidence returning. "Say you feel what I feel, that this is the beginning of something extraordinary." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibilities and consequences. Accepting the ring meant committing to a deeper deception. Refusing it meant disappointing Victoria and abandoning the future she had been designed to secure. But as Evelyn looked into Richard's eyes, another possibility presented itself, one that Victoria had never included in her calculations. What if Richard, with his billions and his influence and his apparent capacity for genuine emotion, could offer Evelyn something beyond material security? What if he could offer her a chance to become someone real? "Yes," she heard herself say, the word emerging with unexpected conviction. "Yes, I accept it." Richard's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, not the traditional engagement finger, but her right hand, a promise rather than a claim. When he kissed her, Evelyn allowed herself to kiss him back with an emotion that wasn't entirely feigned. Later, as they sat before the fireplace in the main living room, Richard's arm around her shoulders and the weight of his grandmother's ring unfamiliar on her finger, Evelyn made a decision. She would tell him the truth, not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to test whether the man who claimed to see the real her could accept the reality of who she actually was. "Richard," she began carefully, "there's something I need to tell you." The engagement party at the Blackwood estate in Greenwich transformed the already impressive mansion into a fairy tale setting. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over rooms filled with New England's elite, all gathered to celebrate what society columnists had dubbed the match of the decade. Richard Blackwood, heir to one of America's great fortunes, and Evelyn Montgomery, the elegantly mysterious woman who had captured his heart in a whirlwind romance that lasted barely 2 months. Victoria Montgomery moved through the crowd like a queen receiving tribute, her smile triumphant as she accepted congratulations from people who had just months earlier begun to regard her with the subtle pity reserved for mothers of unmarried daughters of a certain age. "You must be so proud," cooed Marianne Phillips, whose own daughter had briefly been considered a contender for Richard's affections. "Evelyn looks absolutely radiant." "She's always been special," Victoria replied, her voice honeyed with maternal pride that thinly veiled her satisfaction at the victory. "Richard recognizes that. They're perfect for each other." Across the room, Evelyn stood beside her fiancé, accepting congratulations with the perfect blend of modesty and joy that Victoria had rehearsed with her during frantic daily phone calls since Richard's proposal 3 weeks earlier. The 6-carat emerald-cut diamond on her left hand caught the light with every gesture, a beacon announcing to the world that Evelyn Montgomery had achieved what every daughter of Greenwich society was raised to accomplish. "Are you happy, Richard?" Murmured during a brief moment when they were relatively alone, his hand warm against the small of her back. Evelyn turned to him with a smile that, for once, didn't require conscious effort. "Yes," she answered truthfully, surprised by the realization. Because despite everything, despite the foundation of deception upon which their relationship was built, despite Victoria's constant presence orchestrating every aspect of the wedding preparations, despite the simmering anxiety about the future that awaited them, Evelyn had discovered something unexpected. She genuinely cared for Richard Blackwood. Not in the way romance novels described, not with the all-consuming passion that movies portrayed, but with a warm affection born of shared moments that had somehow transcended Victoria's careful scripting. Richard, it turned out, was more than the wealthy prize Victoria had targeted. He was thoughtful, intelligent, and possessed a self-awareness rare among men of his privilege. That night at the lake house, when Evelyn had begun to confess her truth, she hadn't managed to reveal her deepest secret. Instead, she had told him about her childhood, sanitized versions of Victoria's relentless grooming, framed as amusing anecdotes about an ambitious mother rather than the darker reality of having been shaped into someone else's vision of perfection. Richard had listened with genuine interest, sharing his own experiences with parental expectations. His father, it seemed, had been as demanding in his pursuit of a worthy successor as Victoria had been in crafting a perfect daughter. Their childhoods, though separated by vast differences in wealth and circumstance, shared the common thread of having been valued more for their potential than their authentic selves. That conversation had created a bridge between them, a connection that felt genuine amidst the elaborate performance of their courtship. It had given Evelyn hope that perhaps with time and courage she might eventually share her full truth with him. That beneath the perfect exterior Victoria had crafted lay a woman who had never been allowed to discover who she truly was. "I have a surprise for you," Richard said, drawing Evelyn's attention back to the present moment. "Come with me." He led her away from the main celebration, down a corridor lined with portraits of Blackwood ancestors, and into a room Evelyn hadn't seen during her previous visits to the estate, a sun-filled studio with easels, canvases, and the unmistakable scent of oil paints. "Your mother mentioned you used to paint," Richard explained, watching her face carefully, "before your career in art consultation." Evelyn felt a flicker of alarm at this evidence of Victoria sharing information about her, followed by a rush of nostalgia so powerful it momentarily took her breath away. She had painted, passionately, seriously, until Victoria had redirected her toward more suitable pursuits in college. "I thought you might like to have a space of your own here," Richard continued, his expression hopeful. "Somewhere you could return to it if you wanted." Evelyn moved into the room, touching the expensive brushes arranged in ceramic holders, the pristine canvases stacked against one wall, the palette knife that looked identical to the one she had cherished as a teenager. "How did you know?" she asked softly. Richard smiled. "Your face changes when you talk about art, not when you're consulting or evaluating. When you're talking about the art itself, you come alive in a different way." The observation was so accurate, so perceptive, that Evelyn felt momentarily exposed, as if Richard had glimpsed beyond her carefully maintained facade to something she herself had almost forgotten existed. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the emotion swelling within her. "This is perfect." Richard's smile widened. "There's more. I've arranged for us to spend our honeymoon in Provence. I know you've always wanted to see the landscapes that inspired Van Gogh and Cézanne." Again, Evelyn felt that disorienting sense of being truly seen. She had mentioned her fascination with the post-impressionists once in passing during one of their early dinners. That Richard had not only remembered but planned their honeymoon around this interest suggested a level of attentiveness she hadn't anticipated. "Richard, that's incredibly thoughtful," she said, spontaneously rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Not the measured, controlled kisses they usually shared in public, but something more genuine. When they rejoined the party, Evelyn found herself viewing the assembled guests through a slightly different lens. Perhaps this marriage, arranged though it essentially was, might offer her something beyond the security and status Victoria had targeted. Perhaps with Richard, in the privacy of their life together, she might discover pieces of her authentic self that had been buried beneath years of performance. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, particularly given the secret she still kept from him, the final barrier to true intimacy that she had yet to find the courage to address. As the evening progressed, Evelyn watched Victoria working the room, her mother's satisfaction palpable as she chatted with Richard's parents, clearly already planning the grandchildren, who would unite two prestigious families. The sight triggered a familiar mixture of love, resentment, and obligation in Evelyn's heart, emotions so tangled that she had long ago stopped trying to separate them. "Your mother seems to be enjoying herself," Richard observed, following Evelyn's gaze. "This is her triumph as much as our celebration," Evelyn responded, the honesty slipping out before she could filter it. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an interesting way to put it. Evelyn felt a flash of panic, worried. She had revealed too much. I just meant she's been looking forward to seeing me settled. Richard's non-committal response carried a note of skepticism that suggested he understood more than Evelyn had intended to convey. Well, we should probably continue our rounds. My great-aunt Cordelia will never forgive me if we don't personally thank her for coming all the way from Boston. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, champagne toasts, and the continuous performance of being the perfect, radiant bride-to-be. By the time the last guests departed, Evelyn's face ached from smiling, and exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. "Stay the night," Richard suggested, as they stood in the grand foyer, his parents having already retired and the staff discreetly clearing away the evidence of celebration. "It's late, and I hate the thought of you driving back to your apartment alone." The invitation carried an undercurrent that Evelyn couldn't ignore. Though they had shared intimate moments during their courtship, she had always managed to maintain certain boundaries, deflecting Richard's advances with an artful combination of promise and restraint that Victoria had coached her to perfect. But now, with the wedding just 6 weeks away, with the ring on her finger and their future seemingly secured, those boundaries were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Richard, though patient, was clearly eager for their relationship to progress to its natural conclusion. "I should probably get back," Evelyn hedged, her heart rate accelerating slightly. "I have an early meeting at the gallery tomorrow." Richard stepped closer, his hand coming to rest on her waist. "Cancel it," he suggested, his voice low. "You won't be working there much longer anyway." The comment, though accurate, they had agreed that after the wedding Evelyn would focus on philanthropic work rather than maintaining her position at the gallery, sent an unexpected chill through her. It was a reminder of how completely her life was about to change, how thoroughly she would soon belong to the Blackwood world. "I can't just cancel," she protested mildly. "Margaret is counting on me to help with the new exhibition." Richard sighed, then smiled ruefully. "Always so responsible. It's one of the things I love about you." He kissed her forehead. "Go home, get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow." Relief and guilt warred within Evelyn as she accepted the car Richard had arranged to take her back to her apartment. The driver, professional and discreet, maintained a respectful silence during the journey, allowing Evelyn to sink into her thoughts. 6 weeks. 6 weeks until she became Mrs. Richard Blackwood. 6 weeks until she stepped into the life Victoria had designed for her from birth. 6 weeks until the wedding night that she both longed for and dreaded with equal intensity. Because, despite the genuine connection she had begun to feel with Richard, despite the growing hope that their marriage might offer her more than mere security and status, Evelyn still carried the burden of her most closely guarded secret, her inexperience. At 32, in an age where sexual experience was assumed, Evelyn had managed to maintain a carefully crafted illusion of sophisticated maturity. Victoria's emphasis on saving herself for the right man, meaning the wealthiest, most socially advantageous prospect, had evolved over the years from practical advice to an unbreakable commandment. The few relationships Evelyn had been permitted to pursue had been strictly controlled, with Victoria somehow always managing to orchestrate an elegant exit before physical intimacy became inevitable. The result was a woman who could discuss art in 3 languages, navigate any social situation with flawless grace, and charm the most powerful men in America, but who had never experienced the most basic form of human connection. A secret that, with each passing year, had transformed from a simple fact to a source of deep shame. Evelyn had tried several times to broach the subject with Richard, that night at the lake house, before she lost her nerve. During a quiet dinner, at his penthouse, when the moment had seemed right until his phone rang with an urgent business matter, each attempt had ended in retreat, her courage failing before the words could form. As the car pulled up to her apartment building, Evelyn thanked the driver and made her way inside, her thoughts still circling the problem like water around a drain. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to find the courage to tell Richard the truth and risk losing everything Victoria had worked for, everything Evelyn herself had invested her life in becoming. The light on her answering machine was blinking when she entered her apartment. Victoria, no doubt, calling to analyze every moment of the evening, to strategize the next steps in their carefully orchestrated campaign. Evelyn ignored it, slipping out of her designer dress and removing the diamond earrings Richard had given her to match her engagement ring. She stood before the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. The perfect hair, the flawless makeup, the body maintained through rigorous diet and exercise to meet the exacting standards Victoria had established. Who was she, really, beneath all this perfection? What would be left of Evelyn Montgomery once she became Evelyn Blackwood? Would the studio Richard had created for her be enough to reclaim some fragment of her authentic self? Or was it simply another gilded cage, more spacious, but no less confining than the one Victoria had built around her? The questions swirled in her mind as she prepared for bed, unanswerable yet persistent. As she drifted towards sleep, one thought crystallized with unexpected clarity. She had to tell Richard the truth, not just about her physical status, but about everything: the years of calculated grooming, Victoria's manipulation, the performance that had defined their relationship from the first moment they met. If there was any hope for genuine happiness in their marriage, it had to be built on truth, not the elaborate fantasy Victoria had constructed. The realization was terrifying but also strangely liberating, like the first breath of fresh air after being underwater too long. Tomorrow, Evelyn decided as sleep finally claimed her. Tomorrow she would tell him everything and face whatever consequences might follow. But tomorrow, as it often does, brought complications of its own. Evelyn woke to her phone ringing insistently. Victoria, calling for the post-engagement party debriefing she hadn't been able to deliver the night before. "There you are," Victoria exclaimed when Evelyn finally answered. "I was beginning to worry. The party was an absolute triumph, darling. Even Eleanor Blackwood commented on how perfectly you handled yourself." "That's nice," Evelyn murmured, already feeling the weight of her mother's expectations settling back onto her shoulders. "Nice? It's extraordinary. Eleanor Blackwood is notoriously difficult to impress. Now we need to discuss the bridal shower. I'm thinking we should hold it at the club with perhaps 70 guests, intimate by Blackwood standards." "Mother," Evelyn interrupted, a note of resistance in her voice that immediately caught Victoria's attention. "I need to talk to Richard today, alone. It's important." The silence that followed was charged with tension. "What's wrong?" Victoria finally asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Did something happen last night?" "No, nothing happened. That's part of what I need to discuss with him." Another silence, this one longer and heavier. "Evelyn," Victoria said, her tone now carefully controlled, "whatever you're thinking of doing, I urge you to reconsider. We are so close to everything we've worked for." The "we" wasn't lost on Evelyn, the perpetual fusion of their identities that had defined her entire life. "This isn't about the wedding, Mother. It's about being honest with the man I'm going to marry." Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Honesty is a luxury, darling, not a necessity, especially in marriages like the one you're about to make. The Blackwoods didn't accumulate their fortune by being transparent about everything." "This is different," Evelyn insisted, an unfamiliar resolve hardening her voice. "This is personal, between Richard and me." "There is nothing between you and Richard that doesn't affect me," Victoria snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Everything you are, everything you have, everything you're about to become, I made that possible. I created the Evelyn Montgomery that Richard Blackwood fell in love with." The blunt assertion of ownership, of authorship, struck Evelyn with physical force. "That's why I need to tell him the truth," she said quietly, "because the woman he thinks he's marrying doesn't really exist." "Don't be dramatic," Victoria dismissed. "Every bride presents her best self during courtship. The only difference is that your best self was carefully curated rather than left to chance." "I'm going to tell him," Evelyn repeated, her decision solidifying with each moment of resistance from Victoria. "All of it. Today." Victoria's voice turned cold. "If you sabotage this marriage, Evelyn, don't expect to come running back to me. I've invested too much in you to watch you throw it all away on some misguided notion of authenticity." The threat hung in the air between them, explicit and final. For the first time in her life, Evelyn was faced with the possibility of a complete break from Victoria, from the only constant presence, however controlling, she had ever known. "I understand," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't think you do," Victoria replied, "but you will if you go through with this foolishness." The line went dead, Victoria having delivered the last word as she always did. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, phone still in hand, momentarily, paralyzed by the magnitude of what she had just set in motion. Victoria's threats weren't idle. If Evelyn failed to secure the Blackwood marriage, she would indeed find herself cut off from the only support system she had ever known, left to navigate a world for which she had been trained to be an ornament. Not a participant, but the alternative, continuing the deception, entering marriage based on an elaborate performance, living in constant fear of discovery, was suddenly intolerable. Whatever the consequences, she had to tell Richard the truth. She dialed his number with trembling fingers, rehearsing opening lines in her mind as the phone rang. When he answered, his voice warm with affection, all her prepared speeches evaporated. "Richard," she said, the word emerging as half statement, half question. "Good morning," he replied, amusement coloring his tone. "Did you sleep well after our celebration?" "Yes, no, I mean," Evelyn took a deep breath. "Can I see you today? There's something important I need to discuss with you." A pause, brief but noticeable. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "It will..." "Saviki," Evelyn said, hoping the words were true. "After we talk." Richard's concern was evident in his voice. "I have meetings until 3, but I can cancel if this is urgent." "3 is fine," Evelyn assured him, grateful for the hours to gather. Her courage. "Your penthouse?" "I'll be there," Richard promised. "Evelyn, whatever this is about..." "I'll explain everything this afternoon," she interrupted gently. "It's better in person." After ending the call, Evelyn moved through her morning routine. With mechanical precision, her mind occupied with rehearsing what she would say to Richard. How did one confess to a lifetime of performance? How could she make him understand that despite the deception, her feelings for him had become genuine? By the time she arrived at his Manhattan penthouse, precisely at 3 o'clock, Evelyn had composed and discarded dozens of potential scripts. In the end, she decided, there was no perfect way to reveal such imperfection. She would simply have to speak the truth and trust that whatever existed between them might be strong enough to withstand it. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse's foyer where Richard waited, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Evelyn?" he greeted her, stepping forward to take her hands. "What's going on? You sounded strange on the phone." Evelyn allowed him to lead her to the living room with its panoramic views of Central Park, the familiar setting both comforting and intimidating. This space, like everything in Richard's world, represented a level of wealth and privilege she had been trained to aspire to, but never truly felt she deserved. "Richard," she began, perching on the edge of the sofa, her posture betraying her. Tension despite years of training in appearing perfectly at ease. "There's something I need to tell you before we get married. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Richard sat beside her, his expression serious. "Whatever it is, we can handle it together." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her resolve. How much easier it would be to continue the charade, to become Mrs. Richard Blackwood and live the life Victoria had designed for her. But the thought of building a marriage on such a fundamental deception had become unbearable. "I'm not who you think I am," Evelyn said, the words emerging with surprising steadiness. "Or rather, I'm not entirely the woman you've been dating these past months." Richard's expression remained calm, though his eyes betrayed confusion. "What do you mean, Evelyn?" The Manhattan skyline stretched behind him, a glittering testament to wealth and power, everything Victoria had taught Evelyn to value above all else. The enormity of what she was about to risk crashed over her like a wave, momentarily stealing her voice. "My entire life," she finally continued, "has been a carefully orchestrated performance. My mother, Victoria, has been grooming me since childhood to be the perfect wife for a man exactly like you, wealthy, powerful, from the right family. The words tumbled out now, gaining momentum. Everything about me, the way I dress, the way I speak, my interests, even my career, was selected to make me appealing to someone of your status. Richard's face remained unreadable, but he didn't interrupt, allowing her to continue. Our meeting at the charity gala wasn't accidental. Victoria researched you for months, learning your habits, your preferences. She positioned us to encounter each other exactly when and where we did. Evelyn paused, watching his expression carefully. She knew which table you'd be at, what time. You typically get champagne. Nothing was left to chance. A muscle tightened in Richard's jaw, but still he remained silent, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm not saying my feelings for you aren't real, Evelyn hurried to add. They are more real than I expected, but I can't enter this marriage without you knowing the truth about who I am and how we came to be together. Richard stood abruptly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the park. For several long moments he simply stared out at the view, his back to Evelyn, his posture rigid. So this entire relationship, he finally said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger, has been what? A con? A sophisticated trap? Set by you and your mother? Not a con, Evelyn protested, though the distinction suddenly seemed semantic rather than substantial. An arrangement. A strategic match. Richard turned back to face her, his expression hardened. I've dealt with people wanting me for my money my entire life, Evelyn. It comes with the territory. But I thought you were different. I thought what we had was genuine. Parts of it are, Evelyn insisted, rising to her feet. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Yes, it began as my mother's scheme, but something real has grown between us, at least for me. And how am I supposed to distinguish between what's real and what's part of the performance? Richard challenged, his voice rising slightly. Where does the act end and the real Evelyn begin? Do you even know? The question struck at the heart of Evelyn's own uncertainty. Did she know where the performance ended and her authentic self began? After so many years of careful shaping, of suppressed desires and manufactured interests, could she even identify her true self anymore? I'm trying to figure that out, she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice entirely genuine. That's why I needed to tell you the truth, because I want whatever happens between us from this point forward to be real. Richard's laugh was short and bitter. You want honesty now, after months of calculated deception? That's convenient timing, Evelyn. 6 weeks before a wedding that would legally entitle you to half of everything I own. The accusation stung, though Evelyn recognized its fairness. From his perspective, her sudden attack of conscience could easily appear strategic rather than genuine. I understand why you'd think that, she acknowledged, fighting to maintain her composure. But there's more you need to know. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the most difficult confession. The woman you think you're marrying, the sophisticated, experienced woman who fits so perfectly into your world, she doesn't exist, not completely. Richard's expression shifted from anger to confusion. What are you talking about? Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. I've never been with a man, Richard, not intimately. His eyes widened in genuine shock. You're telling me you're a virgin at 32? The disbelief in his voice heightened Evelyn's shame, but she forced herself to continue. Victoria was very clear about saving myself for the right match. Any relationship that became too physical was quickly ended. There was always some reason why the man wasn't suitable, why I needed to wait for someone better. Someone. Like me, Richard concluded, his voice flat. Yes. Richard ran a hand through his hair, visibly struggling to process this new information. So our entire relationship, every moment, every conversation, has been orchestrated by your mother to secure a wealthy husband for her daughter. Not every moment, Evelyn insisted, taking a step toward him. Not the night at the lake house when we talked about our childhoods. Not when you showed me the studio you'd created for me. Those moments were real, Richard, at least for me. And I'm supposed to just believe that? To somehow separate the performance from the reality? How convenient for you, Evelyn, to decide now, after the ring is on your finger, after the engagement party, after announcements in every society column on the East Coast, that you want authenticity. The bitterness in his voice was palpable, and Evelyn felt the hope she'd been nurturing begin to crumble. What had she expected? That Richard would simply accept her deception, embrace her newfound desire for honesty, and they would proceed to a more authentic version of their relationship. "I understand if you want to end our engagement," she said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I wouldn't blame you, but I couldn't go through with the wedding without telling you the truth." Richard's laugh held no humor. "The truth. As if you have any idea what that is anymore." He moved to the bar built into the wall of the living room, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch. "Do you know what I saw in you, Evelyn, beyond the obvious beauty and grace?" She shook her head, watching as he took a long drink. "Authenticity," he said, the irony evident in his tone. "I thought you were genuine in a world of artifice. Do you know how many women have pursued me? How many families have paraded their daughters before me like prized livestock? But you seem different, real." He set the glass down with more force than necessary. "What a joke." "It doesn't have to be," Evelyn said, surprised by the determination in her own voice. "That's why I'm telling you all this now, because I want whatever happens next between us, whether we stay together or not, to be based on truth." Richard studied her, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something else, something that might possibly have been a flicker of reluctant respect. "And if I end our engagement?" he asked. "What then? Back to your mother's drawing board to find another wealthy target?" The question should have terrified Evelyn. 6 weeks ago, even 2 weeks ago, it would have. The prospect of failing Victoria, of losing her only chance at the future she'd been trained for her entire life, would have been unthinkable. But something had shifted inside her during these past weeks with Richard. Some seed of authentic selfhood had begun to germinate, pushing through the carefully maintained soil of her artificial persona. "No," she answered with quiet certainty. "If you end our engagement, I'll figure out who I really am, without my mother's scripts, without anyone else's expectations. I'll find my own way." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, his expression skeptical. "Just like that? After a lifetime of following Victoria's master plan?" "It won't be easy," Evelyn acknowledged, "but necessary things rarely are." For several long moments, Richard simply looked at her, his eyes searching her face as if seeking evidence of continued deception. Whatever he saw there caused something in his expression to soften slightly. "I need time to think," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is a lot to process." Hope fluttered in Evelyn's chest, fragile but persistent. He hadn't immediately ended their engagement. He was considering, thinking, processing. It was more than she had dared to expect. "I understand," she said, resisting the urge to fill the silence with rehearsed reassurances. If there was any chance for something genuine to grow between them, it had to begin with allowing this moment to unfold naturally, without performance or calculation. "I'll call you," Richard said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. Evelyn nodded, gathering her purse and moving toward the elevator. Before she stepped inside, she turned back to him. "Thank you for listening." Richard didn't respond, his attention seemingly fixed on the skyline beyond the windows, though Evelyn suspected he was seeing nothing of the view. The descent to street level was the longest elevator ride of Evelyn's life. By the time she emerged onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk, her phone was already displaying multiple missed calls from Victoria, no doubt responding to some society acquaintance who had spotted Evelyn entering Richard's building and was eager to report on the bride-to-be's activities. For the first time in her adult life, Evelyn ignored Victoria's calls. Instead of immediately heading back to Connecticut on the train that would deliver her to her mother's interrogation, she began walking through Central Park, her designer. Heels impractical for the journey, but somehow fitting for this moment of transition. The park was filled with people enjoying the autumn afternoon, children laughing, couples strolling hand in hand, solitary figures reading on benches. ordinary lives being lived without the weight of performance or pretense. Had she ever experienced such simple authenticity? Had she ever truly existed outside the elaborate construct Victoria had created? Evelyn wasn't naive enough to believe that any life was free from social expectations or performance. But there was a difference between the natural adaptations everyone made to function in society and the complete sublimation of self that had defined her existence. As she walked, memories surfaced, small moments of rebellion or authentic desire that Victoria had swiftly corrected. The passion for painting that had been redirected into the more suitable career of art consultation. The college boyfriend who had been deemed insufficient due to his lack of family connections, despite the genuine connection Evelyn had felt with him. The apartment in the city that Evelyn had wanted, but Victoria had vetoed as sending the wrong message to potential suitors. Each memory represented a path not taken, a version of Evelyn that might have emerged had Victoria's influence been less absolute. Was it too late to reclaim those lost possibilities? At 32, could she still discover who she was beyond Victoria's carefully crafted creation? The questions swirled in her mind as she continued walking, losing track of time and direction. When her phone rang again, she glanced at it automatically, expecting Victoria's name on the display. Instead, it was Richard. Evelyn's heart stuttered as she answered, "Hello?" "Where are you?" Richard asked, his tone unreadable. "In the park. Walking? Central Park?" "Yes." A pause. "Stay there. I'm coming to find you." Before she could respond, the call ended. Evelyn stared at her phone, uncertain whether to feel hope or dread. Was Richard coming to formally end their engagement, in person, or had her honesty, belated though it was, opened a door to something new between them? She found a bench overlooking the lake and sat down to wait, watching as joggers and cyclists passed by, as tourists took photos of the iconic skyline visible through the trees. Ordinary moments in ordinary lives, the kind of authenticity she had been denied. 20 minutes later, she spotted Richard approaching along the path, his expression serious but not angry. He sat beside her on the bench, both of them facing the lake rather than each other. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began without preamble. "About the arrangement, about Victoria's orchestration, about your inexperience." Evelyn remained silent, allowing him the space to continue. "My first reaction was anger," Richard admitted. "I felt manipulated, deceived. But then I started thinking about my own role in all this, about the fact that I too have been following a script, just a different one. The successful businessman, the eligible bachelor, the Blackwood heir fulfilling family expectations." He turned to look at her directly. "I chose you, Evelyn, because you fit perfectly into that script. You were everything the woman in my position should want. Beautiful, cultured, socially adept. The perfect corporate wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect mother for the next generation of Blackwoods." The assessment was so accurate, so aligned with Victoria's design, that Evelyn felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "So, in a way," Richard continued, "I'm as guilty as Victoria of treating you as a role to be filled rather than a person to be known. I never asked who you really were beneath the perfect exterior because I wasn't interested in that woman. I wanted the illusion, just as much as Victoria wanted to provide it." The insight was startling in its self-awareness. Evelyn had expected recriminations, accusations, perhaps even a public denouncement that would destroy her reputation in the social circles Victoria had worked so hard to penetrate. She hadn't expected Richard to examine his own complicity in their mutual deception. "Where does that leave us?" she asked quietly. Richard's smile was tinged with irony. "Good question. The socially appropriate thing would be to continue with our engagement, to maintain the illusion for the sake of both our reputations. We'd have the perfect wedding, the perfect marriage, at least on the surface. We'd produce the requisite heirs, attend the right events and live separate lives behind closed doors. It's a time-honored tradition among our sort." "Is that what you want?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer from his tone. "No," Richard said simply, "and I don't think it's what you want either, or you wouldn't have risked everything by telling me the truth. It's not," Evelyn confirmed. "But I don't know what I do want. I've never been allowed to figure that out." Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe that's where we start. Not with an engagement or a wedding or any of the things our families expect, but with the space to discover who we really are, who we might be to each other without the scripts and expectations." Hope blossomed in Evelyn's chest, fragile but persistent. "You mean? I mean I'm breaking our engagement," Richard stated clearly. "But I'm not walking away completely. I'm suggesting something radical for people like us, an actual honest relationship. One that begins with the understanding that we're both works in progress, both still figuring out who we are beyond the roles we've been assigned." The proposal was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Victoria had prepared her for, that Evelyn struggled to process it. No grand wedding, no secure future as Mrs. Richard Blackwood, no triumphant fulfillment of Victoria's lifelong project. Instead, an uncertain journey of mutual discovery with no guaranteed outcome. "Victoria will be devastated," Evelyn said, the words emerging as half statement, half question. "Undoubtedly," Richard agreed. "As will my parents and the entire social circle that's been eagerly anticipating the wedding of the year. But I'm starting to think their expectations aren't a sufficient foundation for a life together." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle, but firm. "I'm not promising forever, Evelyn. I'm not even promising next month. I'm proposing that we start again, honestly this time. That we give ourselves the chance to discover if there's something real between Richard and Evelyn, not between the Blackwood heir and Victoria Montgomery's perfect daughter." Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, then at the engagement ring. That sparkled on her finger, the symbol of everything Victoria had worked for, everything Evelyn had been trained to achieve. With a sense of both loss and liberation, she slipped it off and offered it back to Richard. "If we're starting fresh," she said, her voice steady despite the momentous nature of the gesture, "then I shouldn't be wearing this yet." Richard took the ring, tucking it into his pocket with a nod of acknowledgement. "So, Evelyn Montgomery," he said, a hint of genuine warmth entering his voice for the first time since her confession, "would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Not as my fiancée or future Mrs. Blackwood, but just as yourself, whoever that turns out to be." The question was simple, ordinary even, the kind of question millions of people asked and answered every day without the weight of dynasties and expectations attached to their response. Yet for Evelyn, it represented something revolutionary, the first truly free choice of her adult life. "Yes," she answered, the single word carrying the weight of both an ending and a beginning. "I'd like that very much." Richard's smile was genuine, lacking the calculated charm that had characterized their early interactions. "Good. And in the meantime, I suggest you prepare for the formidable task of informing Victoria that her perfect plan has been derailed." The reminder of Victoria brought reality crashing back. Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that her mother would never accept this turn of events, would view it as the ultimate betrayal, the unforgivable squandering of a lifetime's investment and planning. "She'll never speak to me again," Evelyn said, voicing the fear that, despite everything, still held power over her. Richard's expression softened with understanding. "That's her choice to make. But ask yourself this, if her love and support are conditional on you living the life she designed, rather than the one you choose, is that really love at all?" The question hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity. Victoria's version of love had always been inextricably tied to Evelyn's compliance, to her perfect performance of the role she had been assigned. Was that genuine maternal affection, or merely narcissistic extension? Victoria, loving not Evelyn herself, but the reflection of her own ambitions. "I don't know who I am without her guidance," Evelyn admitted, the vulnerability in her voice entirely genuine. "I don't know who Evelyn Montgomery really is when she's not being Victoria's perfect daughter or Richard Blackwood's perfect fiancée." "Neither. Do I?" Richard acknowledged. "But I think I'd like to find out if you're willing to let me." As the autumn sun began to set over Central Park, casting long shadows across the lake, Evelyn made the most authentic choice of her life. Not a choice calculated to please Victoria or secure her future or maintain social standing, but one based solely on the quiet voice of her own emerging selfhood, a voice that had been silenced for too long. "I'm willing," she said, the words simple but profound in their implications. "I want to find out who I really am too." Richard smiled, rising from the bench and offering his hand to help her up, not as a gesture of possession or control, but as an invitation to partnership. "Then let's begin." As they walked side by side through the park, not touching but somehow more genuinely connected than they had ever been during their whirlwind courtship, Evelyn felt something unexpected unfurling within her. Not the perfect happiness Victoria had promised would come with securing the right husband, but something wilder and more precious, the first tentative flowering of freedom. Her phone vibrated again in her purse. Victoria, no doubt, growing increasingly frantic with each unanswered call. For the first time in her life, Evelyn let it ring. Tomorrow would bring confrontations and explanations, the social fallout of a broken engagement and the personal reckoning with Victoria that could no longer be avoided. But today, this moment, belonged to Evelyn alone. Not Victoria's daughter, not Richard's fiancée, but simply Evelyn, a woman in the process of discovering who she might become when she finally, belatedly, claimed authorship of her own life. The Manhattan skyline began to glitter with early evening lights. Evelyn took her first steps into an unscripted future, uncertain, frightening, and more full of possibility than anything Victoria had ever planned for her. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Evelyn's journey from perfect daughter to authentic woman has moved you. Her struggle to break free from her mother's expectations and find her true self reminds us all that it's never too late to rewrite our own stories. If you enjoyed The Perfect Illusion, we've curated a special playlist of equally captivating stories about self-discovery and personal transformation. You'll find it by clicking the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video if Evelyn and Richard's story resonated with you. We bring unique, emotionally rich narratives like this one every day, exploring the complexity of human relationships and the courage it takes to live authentically. What would you have done in Evelyn's position? Would you have chosen security or freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives and connecting with our community of storytelling enthusiasts. Stay tuned for our next emotional journey, coming tomorrow. Until then, remember that the most beautiful stories are the ones we write ourselves.